One use for the data tools is as the replacement for the Business Intelligence Development Studio, or BIDS, of earlier versions of SQL Server. BIDS was built using Visual Studio 2008 and provided templates for creating various business intelligence projects, including reporting services reports. Data Tools replaces BIDS and provides a much better development environment than BIDS did, not least because they are far more closely integrated into Visual Studio than BIDS ever was. The best part of Data Tools is that if you have experience with Visual Studio, you'll feel right at home with the Data Tools. They have support for code navigation, IntelliSense, language support for T-SQL that's similar to C# and VB, platform-specific validation, debugging, and declarative editing in the T-SQL editor, and lots more features. You can make use of source control right within the development environment. And when you're ready to deploy a report, you can publish the report like you do for a website to any supported version of SQL Server, including SQL Azure. The core feature of SQL Server Data Tools for report development is the Report Designer, which fully supports every reporting services feature you can build into a report. In this set of videos, I'm going to explore how to make effective use of the Report Designer. First, I need to talk a little bit about installing SQL Server Data Tools. First of all, the system requirements for Data Tools are the same as for Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1. So if you have that version of Visual Studio installed, you're good to go. Data Tools doesn't require prior installation of Visual Studio. If you don't have Visual Studio 2010 Professional Edition or above installed, installing the Data Tools will automatically install the Visual Studio 2010 integrated shell. Apply Service Pack 1, and then install the Data Tools components. The integrated shell will only contain the Data Tools tools, that set of tools, and doesn't include Visual Studio programming languages and the features that support their respective project systems. If you do have Visual Studio 2010 Professional or later installed, then Data Tools integrates into that installation, and you'll find that Visual Studio has new features and project templates. If you install SQL Server Data Tools on Visual Studio 2012, you'll also need to install the SQL Server Data Tools Business Intelligence for Visual Studio 2012 package to get the full set of project templates for analysis services, integration services, and reporting services. The reason for this additional step is that these project templates weren't ready when SQL Server 2012 was released. Alright, when you install Data Tools as part of SQL Server 2012, that's one of the options as part of the installation package, but you don't have Visual Studio installed, you won't actually end up with Data Tools fully installed. Instead, you'll have the Visual Studio shell installed with a project in the SQL Server node of templates with a SQL Server Data Tools (web install) item. When you create a project using that template, it'll download and install the actual tools. This is kind of a funky way of doing things and potentially very confusing, but I'm sure Microsoft had a great reason for doing it that way. Now, when you have the Data Tools installed and you're ready to create a report project, you're going to have the option of two different report types. And the project templates appear in the Business Intelligence Reporting Services section of the New Project dialog box. Alright, these project types are quite different, both in the end result and how you get there. The first project is the Report Server Project Wizard. This supports fast development of a basic report with limited selections, and it steps you through the entire process of creating the report. When you use this template, it fires off a multi-step wizard that helps you create a data source, define a query, and specify basic layout and appearance options. This is a great way to start a simple report design, and then you can make modifications to add more sophisticated report features once you're completed with the wizard and you're dumped back into the Report Designer. And then the second report type is the Report Server Project. This is probably the template that you'll use once you've learned the basics of building reports. The option creates an empty project with a structure for adding data sources, data sets, and report definition files. But you'll have to add all of those components yourself. Now, the end result of creating a new project using either of these templates has the same project structure. except that with the wizard, you'll have a semblance of a functional report. Within this project structure, you can add as many report data sources, data sets, and report definitions as you like. Now I'm going to show you a bit of the user interface of SQL Server Data Tools. So here I have started up Microsoft Visual Studio. Now this is Visual Studio Professional or Better, actually the Ultimate Edition, but you'll have a similar user interface if you install just the integrated shell with the data tools. So I'll come up here to File and create a new project. And there you can see I have the Business Intelligence templates with reporting services. And I'm going to create an empty report server project. I don't care what I call it. This is just going to be a throwaway project, and I don't care where the location, so I'll just accept the defaults down here. And I'll click on OK. And as you can see, we successfully created that report project. Alright, and this shows you within Solution Explorer the structure, the project structure that Data Tools created for this report project. Alright, so you end up with 3 folders: shared data sources, shared data sets, and reports. Now, a report server project, whether you create it using the report server project or the wizard template, always contains those 3 folders. Alright, so shared data sources. It's a container for files that contain data source connection strings that you want to share with multiple reports. Any files that you put here are going to have a .rds file extension. And it's an XML file that describes the data provider and the connection string that reporting services is going to use with running the report to access the data. And then the shared data sets, that's a container for files that store data set definitions that you want to share with multiple reports. Again, not going to be contained within your new report definition. A report shared data set definition has an extension of .rsd, and it's also an XML file that contains the query that's used to obtain the data for the report, as well as any properties that affect the usage of the data, such as data types and collation information. And then finally, the reports folder here is a container for your report definition files. These files have an extension of .rdl, which stands for Report Definition Language, also an XML language that defines the contents layout and structure of a report. If a report doesn't use either shared data sources or data sets, then that information, the source of the data as well as the query information, will be stored and embedded within the .rdl file. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you structure your report files. Now you can include other types of files in a report project, which serve as resources that Data Tools will deploy along with the report to the report server. For example, you could include shared image files rather than embedding them in each report that uses them. Or you can include documentation files for user reference. So it's pretty much unlimited what you deploy with your report. Now, somewhat strange is that you can't create new subfolders within these folders, nor can you add any other project folders. Right-click on here, there's no option to add a new folder. You can add new items or existing items, but you can't add new folders. Okay. You also can't easily delete any of the standard folders in a report server project. Now, it's really highly unusual to have these kinds of limitations in a Visual Studio development project. But in the case of a report project, they do serve to maintain a rigid structure so that Data Tools knows where to find report files when it needs to deploy them to a server. The one thing you can do is add multiple report server projects to a single solution if you want a bit more flexibility and control for structuring report files within the Data Tools. On the other hand, I want to be clear, that's just the folder structure here locally as I'm developing the project. You can use almost any folder hierarchy that you want on the report server when you deploy the reports. There's far less rigidity there. So, 2 different things going on. Otherwise, Visual Studio provides all its usual flexibility when working with projects. You can add existing projects or individual report items to a project, even if they're shared with other projects. And many of the Data Tools report building features are integrated with other Visual Studio coding features. It creates a very robust development environment. Okay, so when you add a new or existing item to a report project, it works pretty much the same for any kind of Visual Studio project. The options are available in various ways, including from the Visual Studio main menu, but the easiest way is to right-click the appropriate folder in Solution Explorer and then select either Add New Object Type or use the Add menu item to add a different type, either new or existing. So if I right-click on Reports here, I can add a new report. That is going to fire off a report wizard. I can also select this Add for a new item or to add an existing item. Now, this Properties option here might look a little bit tantalizing, but if I select it, all I have is a read-only property called Name with that set value for that folder. I can't change the name of that folder at all. So that Properties option from the report folder is pretty much useless. Okay, so now if we look at creating a new report, once again, if we select Add New Report here, it starts the report wizard. If I just want to add a report but not use the wizard, then what I need to do is select Add and New Item. That opens up this dialog box. It knows that it's a report project, so it gives me just report options here. And I can select Report. And once again, this is a throwaway project. I don't really care what I call this report. And I'll click on Add. And then that creates this new report file. It's called report1.rdl, and it opens up the report designer. And because I did that from the reports folder, it puts it within that folder. It knows the right thing to do as far as where to locate files. Now, there are a few windows here that you'll use to build a report, including the design surface, as well as windows that provide components and data for the report. So the main part of the window here is the report designer. It's a GUI design surface where you can drag components and data to build the report. It provides a fairly good representation of what the report will look like, albeit without any real data displayed. As with other Visual Studio designers, you can select objects and configure their appearance and layout, as well as set various properties in the Properties window. If you've done any kind of Windows or web forms development in Visual Studio, this design surface is going to be very familiar to you. All right, another window is the Report Data window. This gives you access to various built-in fields that you can include a report. So if I expand that, you can see that there's execution time, language, page name, page number, total pages, the user ID that caused the execution of file, and a number of other things. And you can drag these onto the Report Designer surface and include that information within the contents of the report. All right, then the Report Data window also includes other folders that you can use to organize the data and images that you include with a report, as well as adding parameters that let you create dynamic reports based on various parameter values. All right, then the last component isn't actually shown here, but I can select View and Toolbox. And this contains all of the visual elements that you can add to a report, including components that display data. In particular, you'll work an awful lot with tables, matrices, and lists. But then you can also add additional components like lines, text, charts, gauges, maps, sparklines, and indicators, and various other things. So adding any of these components to a report simply requires dragging the component to the design surface and dropping it where you want it, then configuring the component, setting various properties. This is the same way the Toolbox components work for other Visual Studio designers.